Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz, and I'm speaking to you from the pulpit of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia. At this time, I'd like to speak with you about a subject that I believe is very close and dear to each of us, and that is eating. So my message is entitled, Eating to Satiety and Offering Blessing. Some of you may recognize that as a paraphrase of a verse in the Bible. Religion is for real. The Bible reminds us over and over that we are embodied beings and that our lives involve the bodily activities that we share with all the animals. But the Bible also tells us Ki lo al halechem levado yichya ha'adam. Man does not live on bread alone, but rather by whatever God decrees. That was said with respect to the manna, the generation-long substitute for cereal grains that our sacred stories remember as our wilderness era staple food. But there's a broader point, that eating doesn't have to be only a concession to our animal bodies. It can also be a channel to recognition of the role of God in our lives. How to do this? The Bible explains it in one sentence with three verbs: eat, become satisfied, and offer blessing. V'achalta, v'savata, uve'rachta. When you have eaten and you are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which God has given you. And that comes from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verse 10, which is being read in synagogues across the world on this coming Shabbat. Let's go beneath the surface for each of those three verbs and uncover a spiritual message here. First one, you will eat. The Bible knows all about famine. Last week when we read the laments for the destroyed city of Jerusalem, we chanted a very sad sentence from the book of Lamentations. Those who died of famine suffered even more than those who died by the sword. What a sad thought. But consider these facts, and they ought to make us sad too. I'm quoting from the Action Against Hunger organization, its document, World Hunger, Key Facts and Statistics. Fact: there is more than enough food produced in the world to feed everyone on the planet. Fact: as many as 811 million people worldwide go to bed hungry each night. Fact: small farmers, herders, and fishermen produce about 70% of the global food supply, yet they are especially vulnerable to food insecurity. Poverty and hunger are most acute among rural populations. Fact: conflict is a cause and consequence of hunger. In the year 2020, conflict was the primary driver of hunger for over 99 million people in 23 countries. Fact: an estimated 14 million children under the age of 5 worldwide suffer from severe acute malnutrition, also known as severe wasting. Yet only 25% of acutely malnourished children have access to life-saving treatment. And these facts should really give us pause. There is hunger in our world, but that is not because of God's failure. It is ours. Human greed and lust for power are the direct and the indirect causes of preventable hunger. Our environmental destruction is turning arable land into desert. The time to reverse that is not in the decades to come. It's now. Or don't we care enough about children going hungry? The second verb, you will become satiated. Visavata. Of course, there's a physical meaning to this, but there are other layers of meaning as well. There are some people who eat but are not satisfied. Maybe they're eating foods that do not promote satiety. Maybe they're getting a temporary fill on junk food, and when the insulin kicks in to counteract their sugar high, they're hungry all over again. The long-term effects of this are terribly destructive to health. I'm not an expert nutritionist. I cite this information to prompt you to think about satiety as a metaphor. What constitutes being sated in life in general? Rabbi Shimon ben Zoma answered the question with timeless words 1900 years ago. Ezehu ashir, he asked. Hasameach b'chelko, he answered. Who is wealthy? The one who is happy with his portion. Do you always want more? If so, you are not stopping to be content with that which you do have. You'll always be poor in your own eyes, regardless of objective measures of your security. Do you remember the board game of life? It was popular when I was a child, 50 plus years ago. Your playing token was shaped like an automobile. A spinner determined how many squares you would advance, but ultimately you got to the end of the winding course, and either you retired to millionaire estates or else you finished up in the poorhouse. That was the game. I'm not knocking sound financial planning, but don't think that a life spent without any spiritual investments will count for anything of ultimate value. As we all know, you can't take it with you. Having received only a poor education in spirituality, people are hungry for the real thing, but they have a hard time recognizing it. They end up binging on various kinds of spiritual junk food, fads, schemes, or borrowed spiritual practices that are rooted in some other culture, some other lifestyle, and that don't work without serious changes to one's own lifestyle. A Taoist friend of mine who teaches martial arts tells his students at the first meeting that spiritual discipline is, first and foremost, a discipline. If they don't want to put in the hours of practice, they should stop right away and avoid wasting their time or his. How do you avoid spiritual junk food and achieve genuine spiritual nourishment? Here's where the third verb comes in. Uverachta, you will offer blessing to God. This is the third component. At its very core, to bless God is to acknowledge that you are not the source of all the good things that come your way. You bought the bread at the market, and let's concede that you worked hard for the money that you paid. But you can't eat those dollar bills or that plastic credit card. The bread comes from the soil, and God's green earth is the necessary substrate for all that we then accomplish. That's why when Jewish people break bread to start a meal, we recite a verse from the Psalms, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. God brings forth bread from the earth, and we bless God for that. But does that sentence strike you as a bit strange? God brings wheat or barley or spelt or oats from the earth, and we make it into bread. But the blessing, God brings forth bread from the earth, acknowledges that without God's initial and ongoing gifts, nothing else would be accomplished. Every time we take a meal, our Jewish religion reminds us of the triad that unites our animal and our spiritual selves: to eat, to know how to be sated, and to bless the Lord your God.